So in the video yesterday, some people suggested that I key out the purple background and put myself in Portland, Oregon, rather than my office. So this is what that looks like. I'm so sorry you guys suggested that. So without any further ado, let's send it over to Simon Pagenaud and Roger Penske to get us started on today's video.
Drivers! Drivers! Start your engines!
Start your engines!
Oh, it was a crazy day for IndyCar at Portland. Championship implications, cars spinning out all over the racetrack, the traditional Portland Pileup. But who came out on top? Let's talk about it. Oh boy, I love it when we have a race that gives me a lot to talk about, and certainly this race did. Let's start at the beginning. The first turn, schmozzle, as one Bob Varsha once coined after the 1998 pileup at Portland. So I got it a little bit wrong yesterday. I said that the guys up front would be free from the shackles of the Portland pileup. That was not the case, as Felix Rosenqvist managed to push both PNC Ganassi cars into the runoff area, several cars going skittering and spinning all over the place. And wow. So we saw in the Indy Lights race yesterday, ironically enough, race control actually threw a yellow full stop because about half the field cut the chicane. They actually just reordered the field in their qualified positions and restarted the race. Now, that's not what happened according to the IndyCar rulebook. The IndyCar rulebook had all those guys that you saw go through the runoff area there in turn one sent to the back of the field. And they did that through a digital system that was explained on NBC Sports. Suffice it to say, if you attempted to make the corner and made the corner in the middle of that chaos, you got priority. Then if you cut the corner, you were second priority, and if you were involved in the accident, you were third priority. So that's how they arranged the field, and that was all based on the computer modeling. For some reason, this process took, I think it was like 11 laps. And this is where I've got to rant a little bit. And I know I'm going to be fair up front to the race control folks, is that I think everybody understands that it's going to be a process, and we do want to see a fair contest. There's no doubt about it. We want to see the order be, the order to be the proper order, as it should be according to the rulebook. But it surprises me that it takes this long, and I would love to hear an explanation, perhaps, an official explanation, because this also happened at the Indianapolis 500. And, even if it's in the effort of fairness, it's terrible television. So to have these really long yellow flags, especially at the beginning of the races, I think this happened. God, I feel like I complained about this at 2019 Portland.
I know IndyCar yellows are notorious for being long, but really 12 laps at a two-mile road course to clean up a couple of cars running into each other. Now, apparently, race control didn't have the order on the grid right, so they had to do a bunch of shuffling. But I just have a very hard time believing it took 12 laps. And when you have a first lap pileup, when you're on network NBC, it's really, I don't think it's a great look. It's probably not great for TV ratings, and it's not great for the paying customers to have that long of a yellow.
I think something similar happened. I mean, that was 2 years ago, but it's kind of hard to go back in the memory banks. But I feel like there was a really, really long yellow, and it was an NBC network race similar to this. Now, of course, this went against the NFL, and all the practice sessions were on Peacock. So, I expect about 2 people watch this race live. But at the same time, you don't want to scare off those 2 people who are watching it live either. So, I don't know, man. I would like to see some sort of a system developed in the off season, or maybe the system already exists where this process can be shortened a little bit, because again, it's really not entertaining. Despite the fact that some racing series are very adamant that adding a ton of caution laps to their races makes the product more entertaining. To me, in IndyCar, you don't want to add a bunch of caution laps because it's boring. It's not what we want to see. And really, the best competition we saw in this race was after the green flag had actually come out and the drivers had kind of settled in, because then you could see the battles develop, you could see the strategies develop. You don't get any of that with cars running behind the pace car. So because of that field reordering, you had a lot of the guys who started up front. Like I said, the PNC cars of Pileup and Dixon, and you had Colton Herta back there, and I think Connor Daly. Bunch of those guys, all at the back. Now, they all had to pit. So they essentially got a free pit stop. So it wasn't, ultimately the strategy played out that it wasn't as big of a deal for a lot of those guys as maybe it seemed at the time. But certainly an inconvenience, and I think every one of them to a man complained about it when they got out of their cars. But it did set up different faces and different names at the front, perhaps than we would have expected in qualifying. Pato O'Ward and Graham Rahal. Now, obviously, Pato O'Ward we've expected to be up at the front at these type of tracks, especially in this year. Of course, he's second in the championship right now, and was going into this race as a championship leader. But he had not even a bad qualifying. He just got knocked out of the Fast Six, and I think a lot of us, certainly me, expected that it might be difficult for him to get up to the front. But hey, he made the first chicane and was able to be up in there. The strategy really was quite interesting today, because it seemed like in some ways Portland is almost like an oval where you want to be out front, you want to have clean air to control the race, and you can actually overcut people at Portland, where usually it seems like on road courses you want to undercut, you want to pit first. But at Portland it seemed like you wanted to pit last. So when Pato O'Ward was in the lead, they pitted him first. The Aero McLaren SP team pitted him first, and then Graham Rahal ran, I think it was like 5 laps in the first stint out in front, got clean air, got some fast laps in, and came out of the pits ahead of Pato O'Ward. So that was an interesting sequence, and we saw that throughout the day. And it really looked like for a long time that it was going to be Graham Rahal's day. He hasn't won since the Detroit doubleheader back in 2017. It's been a while, and it's really not been from lack of trying in a lot of ways. Like I mentioned yesterday, it was qualifying that really kept Graham Rahal out of the winner's circle. And, again, kind of a good omen for the potential of Oliver Askew's job for next year being in the 45 is that Graham even thanked the fact that they brought in a driver who has a very similar data set to Graham in that team, because it helped him qualify better, and thus he ran up front most of the day. But the strategy kind of bit them too. I think there was a yellow flag that flew. I think it was for Dalton Kellett stalling in the first corner, which really kind of took Rahal out of the race, because at that point you had kind of half the field pitting and half the field not pitting, and the other half of the field that didn't pit was the guys who got caught out on the first crash at the very beginning, where they had an extra pit stop. They had saved fuel throughout the entire first stint. They weren't worried whatsoever about leading the race like Graham was. I think Graham probably needed this race to go green to the end with no yellows to have a chance of winning it. And unfortunately for them, it didn't fall that way. But the driver who everything seemed to fall his way today, and a lot of it, to be fair, wasn't just luck. I mean, it was a badass drive. And that was the winner of the race, Alex Pileup, who retakes the championship lead, though he's very adamant, especially when I've asked him about it, that he doesn't really care about the championship right now. And quite frankly, I think that's the right attitude to win it right now, because I watched his race today, and it didn't look like he was thinking championship. It looked like he was thinking, I'm going to go out and win this race. He qualified on the pole, the first time he's actually qualified on the pole, despite being awarded the pole at Texas. So, you got to think if he hadn't been shot out into the runoff area by Rosenquist at the start of the race, that he may have just run away and dominated this thing. And ultimately, he ended up winning it anyway, coming from the back. So that was just one of probably his best drive of the season. I mean, you look at the wins that Pileup has had. I guess if Road America was a bit of luck, but certainly at Barber and Portland, Pileup has just really stepped up to the plate. And I think you look at a championship perspective, and I think that's going to be the thing. Even though, again, he's not looking at the championship. I'm going to look at the championship because I'm the analytics guy. And the fact that Pileup, while has tested at Portland, I think you see a bit of a pattern developing. He's tested at Barber, didn't race there, shows up, wins. Portland, tested there, didn't race there, wins. What do the last 2 tracks have in common? Alex Pileup hasn't raced there. But one of them is a natural terrain road course. Obviously, that seems to be currently Alex Pileup's strength. But obviously, the season finale is at Long Beach, a street circuit which probably half the field by the time we get to Long Beach won't have seen ever in competition, which is going to be a little bit nerve-wracking, certainly from a potential excitement championship-wise perspective. So talking about the championship and Alex Pileup and who may or may not be challenging him for the championship. So Pileup, with his win today, and the fact, this was the ironic thing. I said, and the thing that I got totally wrong, I guess, yesterday, was I said the Honda engines, I was a little bit worried about them popping in the race. None of them did. But you know who did have engine trouble? One of the bow tie cars, and it was the bow tie car of Pato O'Ward. He, for whatever reason, had a lack of straight line speed. I think most people would probably assume that had something to do with the motor going a little bit flat. We may or may not eventually get a confirmation of exactly what that was, but that gremlin kept O'Ward in the midfield and lost him a ton of points to Alex Pileup. Currently, O'Ward is 25 points behind Pileup going into the final two races, but the one driver that I'm looking at is Joseph Newgarden, 34 points back in third place in the championship. I'm currently of the opinion that potentially the greatest challenge to Alex Pileup potentially winning this championship is not necessarily Pato O'Ward, though I think he will be a challenger as well. But Joseph Newgarden's done it before. Joseph Newgarden is quietly sneaking up in that point battle, and the most important thing is that Joseph Newgarden has been traditionally strong at Laguna Seca and Long Beach. Joseph won at Laguna to win the championship in 2018. He scored a top 10 finish in 19. It wasn't quite as good as his first outing there. But Long Beach, most recently, the most recent race there, 2019, he finished second to Alexander Rossi. So I look at Joseph Newgarden as a driver who can grind out a ton of points coming into these last two races. And while Pileup certainly has shown a lot of ability to go to racetracks that he's never seen before or never seen before in race conditions and perform excellently, it may be a little bit more difficult, or it will be. It will certainly be a greater challenge, in my opinion, for Pileup and even O'Ward, who has been to Long Beach before, scored a 12th in 2019, to adapt to those circuits because they're just not going to have that circuit knowledge. So I think if you look at it, if Pileup or O'Ward win the championship at this point with guys like Newgarden and Dixon breathing down their necks, I think they really have had an accomplishment because they have so much less experience. Like I said yesterday, that experience factor is so important in these championships and really so important in IndyCar racing. We saw it in the Indianapolis 500 this year. So I mean, at this point, it's hard for me to make a call because I kind of went back and forth. I was like, okay, it seems like Pileup's got this thing in the bag. I felt like we kind of went into that summer swing there, starting at Nashville, and I'm like, man, Pileup is just going to run away with this thing. But he had some issues, none really of his doing. Then it looked like O'Ward may be the championship winner, and then he had some issues. A lot of them, again, not so much his doing. Pileup's back in the championship lead, but then you have Joseph Newgarden lurking there as well. So it's an exciting championship battle once again in IndyCar. I mean, again, outside of the double points to Indy 500, which they should get rid of, not a whole lot of gimmicks in terms of like the championship points and how they're awarded. So it's great that it comes down to the last race every year in a fairly natural way. So, and Long Beach is going to be a very unique finale as well. Looking into Laguna Seca, I wonder if Colton Herta is going to play a spoiler. We know how good he is at that track. But I would also look at Joseph Newgarden because he's going to have to be aggressive, and Laguna Seca is the type of track that I think he can dominate. We've seen him so often be such a dominant force in this series. You could see him be dominant at Laguna Seca, but then again, I think about Alex Pileup, and I think about how dominant, I'm using that dominant word a lot, how dominant he has been at racetracks that are natural terrain road courses and that he hasn't really seen. It's a very similar track, I would say, at least in terms of geology, the hills and whatnot, to Barber, the racetrack which he came to Chip Ganassi Racing and won straight out of the box. So And that's the other thing, too, is that Scott Dixon's got to be quaking in his boots a little bit, despite the fact that I don't think he's ever really going to be have an unsecured job at Chip Ganassi Racing. You got to think that right now, Pileup is definitely looking like the heir apparent when Scott Dixon eventually does decide to hang up the helmet. It's taken a while for a driver to jump into that number 10 car since Dario Franchitti to really come out and look like a challenger to Dixon and Dixon's superiority at that team. And it certainly seems like Alex Pileup fits that bill, and we could be dealing with him for a very long time in IndyCar. So thank you guys so much for watching. This has been David Land on YouTube. Subscribe for more motorsport content, and I will see you in the next video.